Stained, scented. Scented when I enter, not stinted. Soul scented. Whole when I enter. Pass all their plays to bring forth my men should try to gaslight me, but my path is lit. My path is lit by Harriet, showing me the North Star. Off right where you are. Yeah. We enter in these conversations for freedom. Soul scented.
What can I say about my guest? Minister Cherri Murphy. I met Minister Cherri Murphy at Heart and Soul Center of Light, as you'll hear in our conversation. And what I noticed immediately was that Minister Cherri Murphy was as committed, devoted, and dedicated to spirituality and faith as she is to activism, to the community. Minister Cherri Murphy was a vocal activist in the Bay Area in Oakland, where I live. And what I saw was someone who, in the spirit of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and so many others, Fannie Lou Hamer, who she mentions in our conversation, in the spirit of those legends, right, standing on the shoulders of those legends, she continued that walk of faith and activism. And so when I wanted to talk about Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail, it was clear to me that I wanted to talk to Minister Cherri Murphy. And so I want to give this little bit of background on Minister Cherri and her activism and who she is and who she is. Because, you know, we, as you'll see in our conversation, we get right into the content. We get right into the letter from a Birmingham jail. We dive into it just quickly. We go there quickly. We start talking about the letter. We start talking about some other things pretty quickly. And we just touch a little bit on Minister Cherri. But Minister Cherri Murphy is no joke. Okay. And I just want to be clear on that. That is a little bit more about my sister, Cherri Murphy, and I can't wait for you to hear our conversation. Thank you. Anyway. Hi, Minister Cherri. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Damali. So good to be here and with you today. Anytime there is an opportunity to collaborate with another melanated sister, I jump right on it. So just happy to be here.
Thank you. And, you know, I want to tell people how we know each other. I first met Minister Cherri Murphy at a spiritual center in Oakland. I would even call it our spiritual center in Oakland, Heart and Soul Center of Light. And from the very moment that I met you, I think you were not yet a minister when I first met you, but like from the very moment that I met you, there was like a servant leader, activist leader, like someone who I just could feel the spirit of, you know, the Holy One, the sacred, and like this blend of justice with that I thought was remarkable. What would you say about yourself to let people know who you are, who you are?
Well, first of all, you fill in my heart. So, you know, I'm just, while I'm drinking it in, it's hard for me to talk and drink at the same time. So I just really appreciate your gracious introduction. I think for me, I've just, both of us attend Heart and Soul Center of Light. And so the ability to be in that room and to really be able to know and feel what wholeness is a blessing. And so it includes, you know, whenever part of the contribution to this thing called wholeness includes the opportunity to be in community, because you're in community with your people and your people can see you, they can love you in all of it, right? Because it all flows back to this practice of wholeness. And so the opportunity for me to attend Heart and Soul Center Light while obtaining my ministerial practice, along with my practitioner practice with Science of Mind, was just something that I can't take away. And I think, or I believe from that, you know, oneness can see each other. So what's in me is what's in you. And so I appreciate the gracious um, explanation of who I am.
Thank you. And I mean, it's interesting too, because after you became a minister, I've heard you preach a couple of times, and you've preached a heart and soul. And what became clear to me in listening to you preach your word was that social justice and justice were, like, it felt like just one and the same, with love and wholeness and the things that you're talking about now. And I think you're the first person that I heard, like, consciously, because I'm sure I've heard it said multiple times, and I know that I've come across ministers who are part of a Black liberation theology, and I'm channeling and thinking of Dr. James Cone right in this moment. But I mean, you were one of the first people, I think, who really named for me what that looks like, and then I could see it in what you were doing in the Oakland and Bay Area community. To me, it was like, there's more to this than sitting up here and speaking about it. There's something about being about it. So can you share a little bit about your roots? I would think roots in Black liberation theology, and if there are other elements to your ministry, I'd love to hear about that as well.
Well, part of the roots, the shoot of who I am, as I mentioned earlier, was my practice of science of mind, which I think also is really closely affiliated with process theology, that talks about this idea of connectedness and interrelatedness. And we see that, with Dr. Martin Luther King as we uplift him in his writings, right?
Yes.
Around this idea of this entanglement that we have with each other. The other pieces of that I think that contributes to who I am is growing up in a Black church, but really lifting up what it means to have spiritual steel in your back. That's through the opportunity to be in community with each other, to witness each other through testifying and song and chants and prayer. I think was vital to who I am as an individual. I didn't understand that being pulled in on Wednesday nights, because we were there, I know, Monday through Saturday, and Sunday was without a question, right? But the ability to be in community and be able to witness each other is now, as I get older, the opportunity for the practice of wholeness. And then when I came to Oakland, one of the things that I realized is that on this journey to wholeness, what's really important to consider is that it's not just individualized, that there's something about being able to witness and being witnessed to that I think is the um, is the practice of what I interchange as salvation, depending upon who I'm with, or wholeness. So yeah, we can practice about this idea about worthiness and shame and individualness and solid that comes to it, but there's also a practice around solidarity and collective power building that I find that is crucial to wholeness, right? You can't do it by yourself, just like the stars are up in the sky, that they illumine a certain light and beautiful light. But it's with many stars that you see this beautiful light. In the same way I feel about our practice around wholeness, is that it requires that we do the individual work and the collective power building in order to come to this place called wholeness. This place called salvation, the ability to know oneself, the ability to connect with oneself that doesn't require material gain, materialism, right? Or certain statuses or types of education, but the ability to be with oneself and love oneself despite what the outward conditions look like. I think it's really important.
Thank you, Minister Cherri. So, I did ask you to come, into this space with me to talk about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in particular, his letter from a Birmingham jail. And I asked that of you because I've been feeling, there's so much I'm feeling right now, but I'm feeling like what we're seeing in the world around us. So I'm thinking of this latest decision by the governor of Florida to ban or effectively not allow African American AP African American studies in Florida schools. But connected to that, we have a movement across the country to erase. In my mind, it's an erasure of the contributions and the cultural heritage, wisdom, offerings that Black folks in particular have made to this country. So and there's more, right? There's more, right? This is just like a couple things happening. And Dr. King's letter, I was reading it over, this King holiday that happens. And I was reading it and I was struck by how long ago it was written and how relevant it is today. And so you just came to mind because of the way your theology and your scholarship and your activism look. And so I wanted to hear from you, just to open the conversation about Dr. King, about what makes this letter still so relevant, in your opinion, in modern day.
Well, let's see, I just turned 55 this past year, and this letter was written in 1963. So it's written within pretty much our lifetime. I used the letter beyond also Vietnam as a center point because it was also written in 1967. So it's not like it happened a century ago. We're talking about since the time that we just, folks like you and I, 55 to 60, who are able to remember, right? And reconnect. So I want to set that premise too. The other premise that I also want to connect that I think that I can infer from Dr. King is this idea of that social justice is really a theology. And that somehow there have been some type of propaganda that is separate from what we do on Sunday. Now, I can agree to that, depending upon what kind of church you are. That if you're just about the singing and the clapping, then yeah, it is separate. But what Dr. King does in this is set the tone about the impacts of economic and other forms of violence, and how it's really crucial about how we look through those lenses, because it really is the story of the United States, whether or not we want to talk about it. So, with Governor DeSantis, it should not be a surprise because there's a root, there's a source around that, right? That wants to hold people, melanated people, low-wage workers, people, Black folks, Latinx, Asian people in a certain position in order for an agenda to continue to move forward. That's reality. And so based on that, I think King then continues to pursue what is his calling, his ability to combine this thing called justice. And he says that in the beginning of the letter because he's going down there to a certain portion of the United States that he's not born and raised in. And they ask him, what you doing here? Right. And he's here basically because justice has called me. And justice has called me because there's a certain theology around interrelatedness that brings him there, right? That he sets on the forefront. And so that would, I think, that's his platform. And it's a good platform. And he grew up Baptist himself, right? But he also, did other readings. A lot of folks have said that Howard Thurman was really his preacher, but there were other leaders and other theologians that he also read and that he also considered. So this idea around interrelatedness doesn't necessarily come from a Baptist upbringing, but clearly can come from other writings that you can see that's really connected. And so, yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. And I mean, you named the fact that he was a Baptist minister at roots in the Baptist church and I suppose philosophy. But
Mhm.
the thing that I'm struck by, and I think I really got this when I went to plantation house in Louisiana. I think it's called the Whitney Plantation, where they
Mm.
document the church and the
Mhm.
church's support of enslavement. Uh,
Mhm.
and it was stunning to me. And it's so funny because I should know this,
Mhm.
right? I mean, my own grandfather was a Christian minister, so there's something I feel like I should know.
Mhm.
And to see it plainly, how connected the church
Mhm.
was and how much it was like, yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
let's be with
Mhm.
this. And to hear, I think I've heard Baptist churches have some roots, and I don't know the history in that way, but I want to talk about the roots of Christianity
Mhm.
in white supremacy. Like, I want to hear from you what you think about the fact that that letter
Mhm.
was really calling out that white
Mhm.
supremacy within the church. And so, from you, what do you think? Talk a little bit about, I suppose, your understanding of those roots, and then what you think Dr. King was really trying to address in that letter.
So I'm reminded of being at a particular campaign and having a minister uh, who I literally was inspired by make a comment around the church really has to be careful because when it comes to white nationalism that is connected with Christianity, let's just call it what it is, that the church can be its bitch.
Oof.
Okay. And so, in saying that, we have to understand what church that we're walking into. Because if you don't understand what church you're walking into, um, then you need to walk out and get into the thinking. More than ever, run. Because if you do not see your church responding to social justice plights of the poor, indigenous, Black, and other melanated people, low wage workers, run and run very fast. Because that could be the very church that she's responding to.
Mm.
I say this because um, quite frequently there are a lot of people who entangle white nationalism with the churches. And at this point, there are a lot of people who are disheartened by the church's response, right? You see this in the Pew Research Centers, where a number of young folks are no longer attending churches.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Even in our age, people are not attending churches. So what is it that's not being provided for? Right. And what is it that the church needs to do in order to change? And part of my thinking is I'm along with King, that
Mm-hmm.
if you don't put your spirituality and your justice, if you don't recognize that they are one and the same, you're going to die. And so now that we've come through this pandemic, there are some churches that have not survived. There are other churches that are struggling. Those churches, I talked with a colleague of mine that I went to seminary with a couple days ago. They are still trying to figure out whether or not they want to have two church services. And the reason why they're able to do that is because they were able to combine their spirituality and their justice together. That's why books are still coming.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, this letter is a really good northern star for getting out of the wilderness of confusion about what is the direction of the church.
Mm-hmm.
Because in this letter, it talks about a number of things. It talks about what justice is, how we're related to justice. It talks about creative contention. It talks about the white moderate. It talks about just and unjust laws. It talks about the disappointments of Black people through the lens of Dr. Martin Luther King. And it asks ourselves, really gives us an audit about who we are as an individual, and then who are we aligned with.
Mm-hmm.
And if you still can't, and if you still, after reading this letter, have not understood who the real king is And I say the real king, the radical king is,
Right.
then you're playing. You're playing church. And you're part of the group that's going to die
Yeah.
sooner rather than later, if you haven't already.
Thank you. I mean, thank you for breaking that all down, because that is exactly why we're here today. Because I was like, this palatable, this king that they want to make palatable, that the only quote that you want to speak is the "I have a dream" little snippet. And like, King is like, look, and he's, has said it himself, like, that speech, I don't know, y'all got it twisted. This is who I am. Like you said, Beyond Vietnam is who I am. A letter from a Birmingham jail, and so many other things. But in the letter, he does talk about just versus unjust laws. And I keep looking around the United States right now and see a lot of unjust laws. I mean, it's been this way for generations, decades, but his point is so powerful. It's like, we can create all the laws we want, like we meaning structural we, but that doesn't mean that they're just. Can you tell me your thought about that as you sit with Dr. King and his letter?
So I want to go to page 293 when he actually defines what is an unjust law. And part of his explanation says an unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. I'm gonna stop right there. Okay. So that's a big bam, bam, bam. If you don't get it, that's the first sentence. That it is out of harmony with the moral law. So let me give you some examples of what that looks like today. If you're at an intersection and you're watching a mother help to prepare a child to get to school while they're living in a tent, that's an unjust law.
Yeah.
If you are reading in a newspaper or listening to the news around police officers killing folks and not having a consistent protocol around police accountability, that is an unjust law. If you are in a city or urban area where the majority of the budget is allocated towards police departments and not other means that address violence prevention, mental health services, or education, that is an unjust law. If you are in California and 60 to 70% of the folks who reside there are renters, but corporations and other folks determine the laws around tenant ordinances, you are dealing with an unjust law. Does that make any sense?
Yes, it really does. It really does.
So that's what he's talking about. And these unjust laws hurt folks that look like us, right? Folks who are working in unfair working conditions, who are being killed on the job without no sense of accountability. Those are unjust laws.
Yeah, and we have, I think, far too many of them. And, people do justify a lot of what is unjust because their policy is on the books. And I think what I've come to learn is people make policies. Like, we can talk about policies, and I know Dr. King did a really powerful job of breaking it down. And I believe the people have to change. Like, my personal belief is people have to change for these laws to change, Speaking of the people,
they have to be, they have to be changed, but they also have to be willing to be educated, right?
right.
So,
right.
And I want us to be careful about who and what we listen to. That what I personally believe, is that we've given our power away to too many officials and then left it to them to make the decisions without any investments whatsoever. And that's impacted not only the people, direct impacts of certain people, but those who we're connected with. And so part of social justice is that you need to go to City Hall. You need to align yourselves with those like me who are doing the work and be in conversations about what is the unjust law that's happening right now, right? What is the definition that, what is it? How does he describe it? An unjust law that is a code that is, what is out of harmony with the moral law of interrelatedness, of connectedness, of oneness, right? And then pray about it, but do something more than beyond prayer,
Right.
right? Fannie Lou Hamer said that we can pray all we want, but until we get on our feet and start making a change, nothing is going to happen. So this whole idea of oneness, it's more than just this prosperity of you getting a house and a car and on a hill. It is about making sure that you're living in a community that is safe and thriving. Because if you're the only one that's thriving in a community, guess what? People who are desperate and wanting to feed for their families will target those with resources.
Yeah.
So that really talks about, because I'm trying to stay away from big words, but part of capitalism is about the redistribution of resources and power. That's what we're talking about. That's what DeSantis is talking about when he wants to take those academic AP courses out. He doesn't want to educate people because it will tilt the power distribution.
Right.
Power distribution is about being educated, right? Power distribution is about this idea of wholeness, this idea of that I'm worthy more than struggling day by day, that I should be able to work one job and be able to provide for my family, right? That I should also be living in a safe environment and community where I can raise my kids and that they can go to schools, right? That fulfill, what's needed for them to thrive. And that's what capitalism is really about. It's really about knocking any agenda that allows the opportunity for everyone to thrive. That's the bottom line of it.
Yeah. And it's for me, I think about capitalism and I think about the fact that here's this thing that has been purposely created and really advanced on the backs of, the enslaved, the colonized, and then their descendants in a way that had just kept the cycle of wealth and prosperity for very few, and then weaponize the division. So even the poor white folks, it's so funny how the division that's created out of capitalism, out of white supremacy, can then divide further even the poor white folks, who are actually also keeping the wheel of capitalism turning. But this superiority and supremacy does a really good job of creating such divides that people don't even see that they're caught up in this wheel of capitalism in this way. So thank you for breaking that down. And I wanted to talk about the white moderate, right? And in a lot of ways, I think this white moderate can be seen in even in the poor white folks who are caught in the throes of capitalism, but have decided that they are gonna, I guess, go along with the kind of the supremacy narrative. So what are your thoughts about the white moderate? I know Dr. King, said a word in this letter about the white moderate.
So I'm looking at some of his writings, and I'm looking at page 298. He says, Jesus Christ was an extremist for love, truth, and goodness, and thereby rose above his environment. Perhaps the South, the nation, and the world are in dire need of creative extremists. So for me, the white moderate today would include not only those who are privileged in using their power, but also those who look like us, who help fulfill their agenda. Because not everybody that's skin color is our kin. Let's just tell the truth. That there are some people based on a certain class that will not prescribe to the distribution of resources that helps all communities We can look up at the Supreme Court
Mm,
and take a look at that. The only one who is not for us, right? And so you then, in our discernment, we then have to be in recognition of who are we in solidarity with. And so I always lean to my ancestors about who I'm in solidarity with. My grandmother didn't get a PhD. My grandmother didn't get a master's degree. I don't
mm,
even remember her talking about getting a high school degree, but she
mm,
knew the power of community, right? She knew what that thing that would hold the spiritual steel in her back to move forward, right? And there was a certain undying joy that she has that cannot be consumed by capitalism
mm,
or white power, right? And so when I think about this idea of the white moderate, I'm thinking about agendas that some of us blindly prescribe to because it's entangled with this idea of what it takes to prosper. That if I work really hard, then the next person beyond me should do just about the same thing. And what the ingredient that's missing is opportunity,
mm,
right? The ability to have opportunity and support is what got you to the mountain. And so when we talk about these people who are in dire situations, um, a lot of white moderates, but a lot of those who look like us, who are in certain economic stratospheres, will say, just work as hard as we do, and you'll get to the mountain. And
mm,
that's not the case at all. And
mm,
so, our conversations when we're among a diverse group of people is the ability to have opportunity. And then what it looks like for those who have more opportunity and those who don't. And I think that's what will help the folks that are in the South who are prescribing an agenda that's not in the best interest of those. And then also put it in the face of those who look like us, who are in education, economic stratospheres that some of us will never obtain,
mm,
but will challenge these theories and ideas about what it took for them to get there and how they got there.
mm,
Because I am my mother's child.
mm,
I am my grandmother's ancestors, right? And I am there because of who they were,
mhm,
not because of their accolades of what they accomplished, but what they believed in is what puts me here at the table
mhm. And
and who they were in solidarity with.
yeah, and when Dr. King talks about the white moderate and in the letter, and he talks about, this narrative that they, were trying to offer him about waiting and about, taking kind of pacing himself
Mhm,
and, kind of, it felt to me like very comparable to modern day, where I've been in rooms and spaces where people are, well, I think it's just too much too fast,
mhm,
and this is, built into so many of our institutions, and people are demanding certain things. There's a hold on. And it really like gets me like, it's almost like I feel myself boiling, when someone dare tells someone who is in the throes of oppression every day to wait. What do you think of
mhm.
the idea that there are still folks who think, just wait, just, pace ourselves here? What do you think about that whole thought?
I'm going to read page 299. Um, In the midst of blatant injustices inflicted upon the Negro, I have watched white churchmen stand on the sideline and mouth pious irrelevancies and sanctimonious trivialities. In the midst of a mighty struggle to rid our nation of racial and economic justice, I have heard many ministers say those are social issues for which the gospel has no real concern. And I have watched many churches commit themselves to a completely otherworldly religion, which makes a strange, unbiblical distinction between body and soul, between the sacred and the secular. I think we get to what you described as this idea of waiting, because waiting really is another word for cowardness.
Mm,
We don't have
mm,
the strength or the moral will for a moral law. That's what it really is. The question should be, do we have the moral courage, the
mm,
moral will to change what needs to be done? I heard what you said um, the other day, preacher, but I don't see it,
mm,
right? And it's something, and because of that, that's why I think makes the work that I participate in so powerful, is
Mm,
that not only do we believe it, but it requires a certain here the ingredients, a certain uncomfortability, a certain willingness, a motivation for change.
mhm,
Other than what's obligated to do, it has to be a part of who you are, because it is the religion or the spirituality in which you practice. You
mm,
got to love it. You
mhm,
got to know that when you see something that's unjust, that it hurts your heart, and that there has to be a power for change. Otherwise, why would we do it?
mhm. Yeah. I have one final question for you, and this, takes me to the church, takes me to Jesus, Yeshua, the Christ, takes me to like what I think is supposed to be the root of all Christianity is this person, this master teacher's life and walk. And what do you think? This might be a big question, but what do you think that Yeshua, the Christ, the master teacher, would think of all of this? Like think of the white moderate, unjust laws, the very kind of situations. I'm looking at the picture of George Floyd behind you there, and like the lynchings, modern day lynchings of people, Black identified people in particular, but melanated people generally as well. Where do you think Yeshua, where would Yeshua stand on all of this, do you think? Minister
So, I said this last week in a training with a bunch of Episcopalians. I said that Jesus Christ was the first melanated person to be lynched on a
Shay?
cross because
Mm,
he said the right thing. He
mm,
called for justice, and that he went to the people because they understood the whole idea of what this idea of interconnectedness was,
mm,
that my freedom is dependent upon your freedom. He was born in a housing secured place to a single mother.
mm,
And so, depending upon who you believe through that lens, who Jesus is, should get you out of the seat. Now, if you believe in a Jesus that's blonde and blue eyed, I can understand why you sing the song and then you go home. But the Jesus who I know,
mm.
the Jesus follower that I know, um, is the man who understands and who Martin King follows,
Right.
who who my sisters before me followed, as I mentioned, Fannie Lou Hamer, who understand who that Jesus was that got them out of the seat.
Mm,
Um, so yeah, that's who my Jesus is. And that Jesus would
mm,
be disappointed.
mm,
His heart would be hurt.
mm,
But he also would, I think, continue to give us an opportunity for change. And there's a certain willingness and acknowledgement that in my own journey that needed to happen. I needed to acknowledge who I was in
mm,
order for the change to happen.
mm,
And nothing's going to happen till you acknowledge who you are, who you are practicing to be, and who you really are. Does that make any sense?
mhm. It does.
And so there is a practice for me. There's one thing about saying, "Oh, ain't it awful?" And then there's another thing, which I call, in the biblical text,
Mm,
it's this word called repentance. I can't remember what the Greek word is. But then
mhm,
there's the other Greek word that refers to metanoia, that goes beyond repentance. It
mm,
acknowledges it, but then it calls you to practice something that transforms you, not only you, but the world.
mm,
And when you look in Acts, that word is used. And for me, that is the sole practice that we need today. That there's something else that is required beyond just acknowledging who we are, but the practice of being transformed. And so this practice for me is the spirituality of wholeness, but then there's this practice of that gets me to the mountain. There's nothing that happens. There's something that happens around acknowledgement, around the practice, around the individual practice of wholeness, but there's what's required is the community that helps transform this
mm.
practice, and being in witness that I think is what changes the world. Until we get that, um,
Yeah.
we'll still be talking about this 50 years from now.
Ooh, that part though, that's the thing that I feel in my bones is like, I remember my experiences growing up here, the racism, the things in schools that felt erased about the story of Black folks. And then my children came along and had similar experiences 20 something years after me, right?
Mhm.
And I think about the people who were Dr. King, who 50 years
Mhm.
before me were doing this work. And I am really wanting to have something be different. I'm really wanting for my children's children and generations to come to have to not be talking about this like we're talking about this, Minister Cherri. And that
Mhm.
is partially why I wanted to talk to you today. And I really thank you for your time. I wanted to just ask one final thing. Is there anything I missed? Anything that you'd like to say? Anything that you think, is an addition to this like powerful conversation that we're having?
I think that, and this is for those who are feeling disconnected, those who are feeling isolated, to ask yourself, because I'm thinking about me, I'm thinking about when I walked through Heart and Soul Center of Light, and I was thinking about how it was so difficult for me to be among a group of people. And then when I walked away, I was exhausted.
Mm,
I was exhausted from this thing called performing
mm,
because I really wasn't describing what I was feeling inside. This
mm,
place of disconnected, not owning who I was. And those are the words I think around worthiness and shame. And if you're disconnected with yourself, I think the practice of a spirituality that allows you to combine your faith around wholeness and social justice is the key. I
mm,
can say that and preach because I know it was for me.
mhm,
That in the midst of what I was going through after 2008, I had never felt so happy as I was when I found myself.
mm,
When the text say, when there was a coming to thyself, I
mm,
came to myself. It's what Reverend Andrea talks about when you have come, when she uses that scripture, when you have come to yourself,
mhm.
there's an opportunity today to come to yourself. It requires work. The
Yes,
question is, are you willing? Do you have the moral courage to do it?
yes,
And with good people that surround you, I believe you can.
yes. Oh, I love that. And that is like the perfect note because it is something that we have to come to ourselves, right?
Yeah.
If we are to move this thing in a different direction, there has to be a coming to self.
Mhm.
Thank you, Minister Cherri Murphy. It has been my great honor and privilege to talk to you today. And I look forward to continuing our conversation in different ways just by staying connected.
Thank you so much, Tamale.
Soul-centered conversations, contemplating what moves to be making, what is the next path in this pasture.